All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the lunch keynotes. You're coming into these breakout sessions energized, and we're ready to go. So, welcome to Connecting the Workforce. What can leaders do? I'm Doug Mashkuri, Vice President and General Manager at GovLoop, and today I get to be your moderator. So, thanks so much for being with us. Like I said, I hope you're having a great start to the day. Afternoon is just more information and sharing. So, let's talk a little about today's session. A study from the Meyer, Davis, and Shoorman measured three perceptions of senior leadership and found 49% rate that they trust their leadership. That means that more than half of government employees are feeling a strong disconnect and lack of connection to their teams. So, what can be done? Let's learn how managers and teams can regain trust and connectedness in government. We're going to have a great session on that today, talking about this topic and what we can do. But before that, obviously, if you've been in sessions already today, you know we have to do our housekeeping items. So let's get to our housekeeping items. Uh, we have additional resources available. They're located in the resources tab at the bottom of the screen, including this slide deck. If you're in need of closed captioning feature, look for the show captions icon along the bottom of your screen. We hope you don't have any technical difficulties, but if you do, send us a message to the Q&A tab and my colleague Kelly will get your questions answered. In that same Q&A portal, you can ask our expert Don questions, drop them in throughout the session today, and we'll get to them at the end. We also have an open chat available for you today, so please don't be shy. Get some good conversations going there. We'll be monitoring it as the event goes on. We want to hear from you, and you can also interact with other attendees. And lastly, if you miss anything, do not worry. We will email you a link to the entire event tomorrow, and it'll be sent directly to your inbox so you can view or share with others. So before we bring Don on, I have one more item to cover, and that is CPE training. So 3 simple ways to get your 1 CP for this session. 1, you've done it. Attend this live online training. 2, there'll be 3 polls throughout the session. Take the polls throughout the live training. These will appear as a pop-up window on your screen. Click your response and hit submit. And then lastly, click the evaluation form. It can be found in the resource module on this training and in the resource center in the main environment. So let's get on with the show. I'm thrilled to introduce our speaker today, Don Bauer. He's the former Chief Technology Officer, Global Talent Management, Department of State, and frequent GovLoop and NextGen speaker. Donald, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. Great to give back to the community. That's why I'm here.
We love it.
All right, we ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So, interesting. I was sharing with Doug prior to us going live. Is I was attending a Qualtrics summit earlier this year, federal summit, and obviously some of those metrics that Doug cited at the opening were basically from a survey, and this survey covered government across the globe. It was a very comprehensive study. So it isn't just federal, it's state, local, it's other agencies, other governments. So why this matters, I've witnessed firsthand how disconnection can erode a workplace. So I think, and sometimes it can be the beginning of the end when your high skilled, high talented people start to leave. You feel invisible. You don't feel like you have anything to do. And it's about how we treat people. And I think, the best way to build a great team is to make people feel valued. So I think when I had an opportunity to do this, I was like, this is a great topic to bring up. Current situations, merit a little bit more patience, a little bit more understanding with everything that's going on. So this is why I decided to volunteer to do this session. So first thing we're going to do is a little moment to reflect. Think of a time when you felt truly connected at work, your purpose, your team, your leadership. What made that possible? I think there's nothing better than I think you hear all these entrepreneurs that are super successful, and the answer they always give is do what you love, right? It's not work, all of those famous things. And I can say public service is a little different than that, at least it has been for me. But there is a part of saying you're part of something bigger, you're helping move the nation, of course, State Department is a very unique culture, very meaningful mission. So I kind of felt connected and to what, why I was there, and it was meaningful to be there. So today we're going to talk about organizations, and I know it's a reminder of why we exist, understanding what the disconnect is, and provide a few little metrics around that. And then, of course, how do we do better? What can we do to actually improve it? So back to basics. Organizations are groups of people working with shared resources towards a common mission that meets some human need. So, and if you're interested, if you notice, there's the human in there. We've actually put the word human into what an organization is. And I think that's an important thing. And didn't we have a poll somewhere in there, Doug? I thought we had a poll. Did I miss it?
We did. I was just going to come in and say it. So before we do this, let's launch our first poll, Don. All right, so here it is. In your current workplace, which elements feel most missing right now? Recognition of people as whole humans, clarity about our shared mission and purpose, access to the resources and support we need. All three feel like they're missing. We're actually doing well in all three areas. We're going to give you about 30 more seconds to answer this, and we'll put the results out there. So let's see what we're coming up with. Give us about 10 more seconds, and we'll push the results out here. And I'm watching it in real time. You can't see this yet, but it's fascinating watching the shifts that are happening right now. Don, if you were a betting person,
thanks for the FOMO there,
Doug.
Yeah, can't see anything. So.
What would you bet on for the number one? What are you thinking?
Probably recognition. That seems to be the larger complaint that I get, is people do a great job and they don't get recognized, and it deflates you. It feels like, man, I busted my butt. You didn't even say thanks. Sometimes that can go a long way. So,
all right, I'm going to share the results.
Okay.
You're not wrong, but it came in a different form. It's all three.
Yeah, that's true.
36%, which I think it makes sense given the climate right now and how people are feeling about their workplace and the culture and leadership. So my hope is that through today's slides and your presentation and knowledge, if we ask this question again in 6 months, perhaps we'll see a change.
Depends on if we have leaders in the room that are going to actually take some of this advice and apply it. So there we go. All right. So in the organization, we have three essential elements. We have people, individuals with talents, hopes, and needs, resources, tools, knowledge, capability that we steward together, capacity, I should say, and then the mission, working towards the common purpose that matters. And I just thinking about that, Doug, the erosion of the way that corporate America has devalued the human being. I'm trying to advance the slides and it's not working.
I got you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So the human reality is, behind every org chart, they're real people with families, dreams to pursue, fears to manage. They bring their whole selves to the work, and their creativity and anxiety, everything, they show up. And if we're going to admit it, organizations do not exist without people, and people don't thrive without connection. So I'm starting to kind of lay the foundation here. Next. So when we forget the human, people become resources other than individuals. Decisions are made far from the people that they're impacting. Communication is one way. Productivity is measured while well-being quietly declines. And then, of course, leaders feel pressure to have all answers instead of admitting uncertainty. And, of course, a connection becomes nice to have rather than essential. And it's interesting, if you just look at the way this all works, it goes back to what I just mentioned. We're not considered as people. We're considered as a tool or just something, a cog in the wheel that makes some outcome happen. So next, please. Okay. Just reiterating that. Next. Okay, so understanding disconnect. Now, as I mentioned, I attended the Qualtrics Summit, and Dr. Granger basically presented this as just some interesting facts around workplace statistics. So next slide, please. So 38% of employees are feeling pressure to increase productivity. Boy, does that sound familiar. And it's interesting because sometimes the pressure isn't overt. The pressure is like, wow, we just got rid of 7 people. Now there's only 6 people to do the work of 10 or 12. That's pressure, because guess what? Most of them will look across the room and go, hey, the work didn't stop. Whoever's here still got to do it. Right? And then the other pressure is, of course, external economics, strategic changes, right? The pace of change. Change fatigue is a real thing. I actually was on the front end of what I consider to be a lot of positive change. But at some point, even the people are like, hey, we love what you're doing. I'm like, damn, could you slow down a little bit? Because it takes a while to adjust and absorb and understand. So next slide, please. Increased and unsupported pressure negatively affects top-line attitudes, right? So those that don't feel pressure, they're more engaged. They want to stay. Their well-being is better. Those that have the pressure, their engagement drops, their intent to stay, and their well-being is less. I mean, I know some of this is pretty obvious, but we do have to kind of show that this bears out in the surveys as well. Next slide, please. Now, it said 63% of employees worldwide rated their trust in leadership as favorable, but only 6% believe that they would choose their well-being over immediate profit or gain, right? And so that's an important thing, because it comes down to when you care more about a product or a service than you do about the employees. To me, that's a pretty slippery slope. So, and there's our next poll.
Yes. So here's poll number 2 in relation to this slide here. What dimension of trust and leadership do you personally struggle with most? Please choose one. 1, competence. Do they have the skills to lead us through this? 2, integrity. Are they walking the talk on values? Benevolence. Do they truly care about our well-being? Or I trust my leaders in all 3 dimensions. I honestly don't trust leadership at all right now. Really, this is, and looking at the slide here, the 63% worldwide rated their trust in the leadership as favorable. That's good to see. But I think your point here now, what do people need to know? Do you truly care about us? The benevolence piece. So I'm really curious to see how our responses today compare to this. We'll give you about 10 more seconds to do this.
I'm not predicting anything this
No,
time.
me neither. I'm keeping my mouth shut on this one, but we really do appreciate your inputs on this, and it is confidential. It's anonymous. We don't know who's answering what. All right, let me end the poll, and I'm going to push the results out here. So here's what we're seeing. 26%. I honestly don't trust leadership at all.
Pretty even. It's very, very even. Or, well, other than the 26% that don't trust anybody right now.
Yeah, with 20s across competence, integrity, and benevolence. That's really, really interesting.
Yes, it is. All right. Okay, so the state of employee experience, 49% of government employees rate their trust in leadership as favorable. As we mentioned at the very beginning, 51% don't. And of course, it's the benevolence is low. The score is low there on the benevolence side in the government side. Integrity is another big one, and competence. And I think we've all witnessed the meteoric rise of somebody to a leadership position, and they're not as skilled as one would hope. And of course, integrity is, walking the walk and, walk and keeping your word, which interestingly enough is kind of one of the things I lead with all the time. And that really helps with an organization. If you basically, every employee, when they first came in, whether it was a contractor or a Fed, say, look, if you ask me a question, I'm either going to give you 1 of 2 answers. I don't know, or I can't talk, or I will tell you the truth, or tell you I don't know, or I'll tell you I can't talk about it, because in government, there are things we just can't talk. But I said, I'll never lie to you, and I always kept that promise to all my employees, because I kind of feel like, and it's okay to say you don't know. And I think ultimately a lot of leaders feel pressure to come up with an answer when they don't know an answer. And sometimes it's okay to say you don't know. So next. Our brains aren't designed for 21st century corporate life. They still think they're out on the savannah. So obviously, you know, hunter-gatherer, you know, survival, yeah, that doesn't fit in corporate America very well. Well, if you demonstrate those characteristics in corporate America, your results may vary, I guess. So next slide. And of course, when your brain's under threat with change, uncertainty, disruption, and I can tell you, I personally have felt a lot of that over the last 6 months. We don't think creatively or collaborate effectively. It's just kind of the way we are. So next. Okay. Validation. If you're feeling it, it's real. Okay. The exhaustion's real. The uncertainty's real. The pressure is real. And so is the longing for genuine connection, authentic leadership in workplaces where we matter. You know, and it's so interesting that when you evaluate this from that standpoint, there's not a huge amount of change required to get to a point where you have authentic leadership and genuine connection. So let's talk about that a little bit. What we can do together. So the foundation, connection doesn't happen by accident. It requires intentional, consistent, and human-centered leadership. Okay, so what does that mean? Do we have another poll coming up? Because I don't want to skip over it if I get too far. All right, next. The 3 pillars of connection: reduce uncertainty, listen and be present, and celebrate progress. And if you're in any kind of leadership role, every one of these is easy to do. It truly is. Reducing uncertainty means, hey, you tell it like it is. You can be professional, be clear, and be transparent. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than to ask a leader a question and get the, you don't need to know, or this, you know, it's that mindset that, well, I don't trust that you have the capacity to understand the complexities of the situation where I should explain it to you. Where, in my case personally, you ask me why, I tell you why. I feel like everybody needs to know why they do what they do, even the most routine tasks. Because if you can tie what somebody's doing to why they're doing it, they're much more understanding and engaged. Okay. The listen and be present. How many times have you gone and sat at a desk with a leader, and the whole time you're there, they're like this on their email, looking at their phone and all this? There is nothing more frustrating or rude than to have somebody who's sitting down with you to have a discussion, or even in an interactive situation like a virtual call, them to be distracted and not paying attention, or just waiting for the noise to stop so they can jump in and respond without actually hearing what's being said. And there's some techniques you can follow. The idea of saying, hey, listen and be present. You know, for me, I'm one of those guys like, oh, I have a response to that. I will just write down 1 or 2 words and I'll keep listening, because sometimes the response that I was going to give isn't going to be appropriate after I let the person actually finish talking. But it's a great idea. And then the other side is you have to exercise the discipline of like paying attention. Actually, if somebody's talking to you, eye contact, you know, ask questions, interact. The idea is that they need to recognize that when you're there, that you're actually present and communicating with them. And then celebrating progress. You know, saying thank you is not hard. It's the cheapest thing. It's free. It doesn't cost any money, nor does it cost any money to give people compliments when they do a good job. And if you get into that habit, it's interesting how the organization culture will change. Because if you start giving people compliments, other people are like, yeah, I think I'll give compliments too. And then they give compliments, and then other people give compliments. So the idea of you know, celebrating progress, and ultimately, you know, this comes with the understanding of what organizational priorities are, and I think we'll talk a little bit about that. The idea is though, just the idea of being kind and recognizing accomplishments in the organization goes a long way in building that trust, right? That trust in leadership, that benevolence factor that we're talking about, the idea that you know, we're expressing interest, we care about you, we want to make sure that you're okay, and that I think my philosophy's always been, if the people are taken care of and happy, they're going to do a good job. I always made sure that that part got taken care of. And it's interesting when you focus on that part, how the other part actually does work out very well. At least it has for me. Next. So be accessible and visible. People need to see you, talk to you, and know you're available, especially as a boss. Leadership isn't about the corner office. It's about being present in the hallways, break rooms, and the challenging conversations. Well, next slide. And so, I think somebody asked, what's the better way to manage this in a diverse environment? And I can tell you there's quite a few strategies. Of course, one problem that we have in our virtualized world is when we have gatherings or meetings that we have people that show up that probably shouldn't be there. And I don't mean that in a way I'm not trying to say it as a negative connotation. I'm just like, somebody will put a meeting invite out for 70 people when only 7 really need to be at the meeting and make a decision. Some of it's people want to hear what's going on. Others, hey, it's another chunk of my calendar that I don't have to worry about doing something else. But the idea is that when you have a meeting with individuals and it's hybrid, especially hybrid meetings are the hardest. You got people in the room who are conversing and talking, and then you got these people remote who are listening to a cacophony of sound because people are talking over each other and you can't understand. So, in a leadership role, especially if you're going to be managing meetings in a distributed team situation, it's okay, speak when spoken to, trust the fact that you have people on the other end that need to listen and hear what's going on. So the talking over each other needs to, and these are all like almost like a code of conduct or the meeting rules. But the other side that's kind of, I think, very, very important, and something I learned early on in COVID, because at State Department, we didn't have telework before COVID. So we didn't have any experience with people working remotely ever. Nobody worked remotely, except very, very senior people. And that was a very small amount of people. But the idea is that if you have people on a meeting in a call and you're asking for feedback or interaction from the team, you got to make space for those folks that are remote. You can't just go around the table and go, okay, we're good, while you've got 6 or 8 people who probably have just as much to say or contribute to the conversation. But part of that from a leadership standpoint is making space for those people to actually speak. And that goes where the leader can say, okay, we've heard from around the table. Online, Sally, what do you think? In other words, you intentionally make space for those people remotely to participate. Okay. So that's one strategy, I think, from a remote team management standpoint, is the idea of meeting discipline, especially if they're hybrid, making sure everybody has an opportunity to contribute in whatever way that they are. If they're there in that meeting, then you should at least give them space to actually have something to say. Because a lot of times there'll be some very interesting things that'll be out by people who would never interrupt and who would never raise their hand. But if you give them a little space to talk, they'll give you some meaningful feedback. And then the other side of this is the town halls with anonymous feedback. And I did this quite a bit. So early on, we did a lot of town halls just to manage and set expectations. When I took over my organization back in 2018, 2019, it was a pretty toxic culture. And so there was a lot of mistrust, a lot of finger pointing. Anytime something went wrong, there was always somebody pointing a finger to blame. And it was a really challenging time to try and get everybody to work as a team. I had groups, branches, and in my organization, there were branches. They wouldn't even talk to each other. That if I asked if I could have a resource from this group, help this guy, no, they work for me. They don't work for him. Why would you have him go over there? All part of the same organization, supporting the same set of customers. So breaking down those barriers and walls really started with organizational priorities, setting the tone for the team, making sure that we all recognize that we are part of a team and not individual people that are just out to do what we got to do. And then also showing how all of our work contributed to the same end goal. Because I think ultimately, sometimes you do need that idea, that understanding of what I do, how does what I do contribute to the mission? And oh, by the way, the guy over here needs you to contribute to the mission for different reasons, but he still needs you to contribute. And having that conversation, that collaboration. And then the other side of that is, for those uncomfortable conversations, or those times when people are very uncertain, or the times that people are stressed, they're not going to be the first ones to raise their hand and start talking to you in a Teams meeting, because that would expose them. But if you use something like Slido or PollEV or any of those other tools out there, they're anonymous. So, and that's kind of putting your money where your mouth is, because at that point, you don't control the narrative. When they ask a question, it's there. You got to answer it. You got to figure out what the situation is. Now, in some situations, you can say, I'll get back to you on that, because you may have to do some research. But I think more importantly is you get the honest feedback on the ground, because it is anonymous. And I feel like if you don't make the space to get the feedback, you're not going to improve. And I can tell you, there was some pretty rough conversations initially in our town halls, because people would ask me questions like, okay, I got to figure this out. And it's about accountability. It's about making sure that, people follow through with their tasks. It's making sure that we don't, have a culture of blame and, the idea that, because something goes wrong, we don't look for the first person to point a finger at. We look at it as a learning opportunity and we move ahead. And then you basically recognize that if the same problem happens with the same person more than once, we didn't learn, and then that requires a different set of rules, or a different way to address it. But people make mistakes. We're humans. So, next slide. Consistent communication. I'm kind of proud of this. I mentioned to somebody, oh my God. It's like, yeah, I didn't even think about it, but I had a biweekly newsletter that ran continuously for 7 years in my organization. Every 2 weeks, I think I missed 3 in 7 years. One of them because I had surgery, and a couple of them were late, but we always had it. And it was interesting because it was a little bit of human, just, hey, this is what's going on, great movies, good movies coming out, holiday events in the area, whatever the case may be. A section for kudos, where I would actually ask team members to share any feedback we got. And that could be from our customers. That was the rest of the department. It could be from our own internal teams about how one team helped another. And then I published that. So every 2 weeks, everybody got to see, the feedback that we'd received. Because a lot of times as a leader, I'll get an email saying, oh, your team was awesome. Well, you would be the only one on the email. Well, nobody knows about that. Put the text of that into your newsletter. Let the whole organization, my organization is about 330, 340 people. And then I also shared with my senior leadership. So our whole front office, our CIO and others all got my newsletter. My distribution was pretty significant. But that called out all of the great things that were being done. Then organizational priorities, because a lot of times the game of telephone can be very dangerous when you have a leadership disconnect between the leadership and middle management and the supervisors all the way down. When you put it out there that this is what we're doing as an organization, it kind of shuts down a lot of that uncertainty that might fly around the organization, or the manipulation that some supervisors use in order to get people to do things. If the leadership says this is what we're doing, it's a little harder to argue that that's the fact. And then, of course, when people know when and how they're going to hear from you, there's a lot less uncertainty, right? Because everybody knew that in my newsletter, if we were going through a rough time or there was a big thing coming up, I would explain it as best I could in that newsletter to make sure. So people actually relied upon that as one of those communications that they got from me to understand why we were doing what we're doing and where we were going. And of course, like I say, consistency matters more than perfection, just having that presence. And then you don't know, I think the interesting thing for me was people would reply to me and go, oh, thank you for saying that. I didn't know what was going on. Little individual feedback. It wasn't collective, and not everybody in the newsletter was blind copied to everybody. So there wasn't any like who gets it or whatever. But more importantly, I always got a lot of interesting feedback from people that were just like, thanks, I needed to hear that today. Or, when COVID happened, man, it was very stressful for all of us. Nobody knew what was going on. We didn't know, what was going to happen. People had so many issues, personal issues to deal with. I don't know how many family members we lost through our team members in COVID. And you got to make space for people to have an opportunity to, live too. It's not just about the work. It's, keeping the lights on and making sure that these people actually could take care of themselves as well. Next. So, newsletter, what made it work? Current events, organizational leadership feedback. This was interesting because a lot of times I'd get an email from my boss. And again, sometimes I would be the only one on the email. I'd put it right into the newsletter and say, hey, look, senior leadership saw what you guys did. And because at the end of the day, I didn't actually do the work. So when they're complimenting me on something my team did, I want to make sure the team realized that they were getting a compliment. I was happy that they were happy, but I was more concerned about making sure the team got recognized for the great work. And then the other thing that we did, the reminders and resources. So this was an interesting section that we added. We added it really shortly after COVID because, work for life is what the State Department used, mental health counseling, resiliency, webinars. There was a lot of things going on organizationally that if you weren't like plugged into the communications of the department, you might miss. So I always made sure that we always had a section that said resources. And then the other thing too, was it was an opportunity to just call out behaviors that you might not think were necessary. Like over inviting to meetings or, not responding to project requests. We did a weekly project review. So it was an opportunity also, called nanny or nagging to remind people, hey, this is things that we do. And that we expect everybody to actually support them in the organization. So next. So why it worked, eliminated the telephone game. Everybody got the same message. Shows you're human, right? Creates transparency, sharing feedback, builds trust, celebrate together, kudos, foster collective pride in an organization. And then, of course, providing support. Resources show you care about their success. I mean, these are all things that are pretty straightforward and easy to do. I mean, most agencies have employee relations. They have a section where you can go find out what the resources are. The newsletter is a great way to keep people in touch. And I can tell you over 7 years, no less than 6 or 7 other newsletters popped up in my feed from folks who took that cue and started having their own. And those had a pretty positive effect on the organization because it kind of kept everybody in the loop on what's going on. And I can tell you, when we're on the HR side of the house doing the IT work, I didn't pay attention to what procurement was doing, but when I got their newsletter, I got a kind of a little window on the world and what they were doing and things that were going on, and maybe where I could see how that intersected with us. So it actually worked out pretty well when we started seeing that stuff go around. So next. So vulnerability is not a weakness, and this is a hard lesson to teach. It's extremely hard for new leaders or those who've not had proper leadership training to basically admit they don't know something. A lot of times when people are put in leadership positions, they assume that they're supposed to have all the answers. And, that could be a product of multiple years under other leaders who felt that same way. And hey, we all lead the way we've been shown. I mean, we all, we emulate those who led before us. Sometimes they're good or bad. And a lot of times we look at them and we're like, well, they got promoted. They're a leader. If I do what they do, maybe I'll get promoted too. Not really evaluating if their leadership style was even the right way to do it. It was just the way that you knew how to do it. So, the other side of that, I think, is, when you're in a situation, especially in a group, as a leader, I always looked at my decision making was for the organization or mission first. Wasn't about me, wasn't about my reputation. This was like, I need to make the best decision for the mission. So routinely, I would ask all of my folks, and we'd gather a team together, and I would say, here's what I know, here's what I'm thinking, what do you think? And give everybody on my team the opportunity to say, this is what I think. This is how I think we should do this, or this is why this isn't a good idea, or this is why it's a great idea. The idea is if you give everybody opportunity to do it, and then at the end you go, okay, well, based on everybody's input, I'm going to go with this decision. And somebody might go, but, and you're like, I get it. I'll own the decision. It's my decision to make. Here's why I'm making that decision, even though your recommendation is maybe not to. But I think the direction we need to go is because of that. That will also build a lot of trust and credibility with your team, because eventually people will recognize that as a leader, your job isn't to have all the answers. Your job is to present the right answer to their leadership, right? It's about making the right decision for the mission, not how the optics are on you as a leader. And saying you don't know is not something that you need to be ashamed of. You should seek out people who do know, take their advice, make a decision, and move on. Everybody will respect you for that. as opposed to making a decision that doesn't make any sense, that's wrong, and embarrasses everybody. And then normally those leaders immediately flip it around and find somebody below them to blame, because typically that's the way those leaders operate. So next. So how to communicate during uncertainty. So, you know, when the administration took over and they were announcing all the furloughs and layoffs and rifts and everything that were happening, I could tell you, man, that flipped everybody upside down. Nobody was left unaffected by that. And there was constant conversation. Are we going to get fired? And, you know, during a lot of that conversation, I had no idea. And somebody who's plugged in at the senior leadership on HR, you typically at least have an understanding of what's coming down the pipe. And I can tell you in this particular situation, every single decision was made in a very, very tight circle. Not anybody was informed. So really the idea of saying, hey, we don't know, nothing's been shared, we're all in this together. I mean, that was the only answer we could give. But the other side of that is saying what we do know, you know, and that's the transparency part. And say, look, you know, I've been to multiple meetings. I've heard a lot of discussion. I've heard a lot of leaders say, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. But it's not a final decision yet. The idea is like, you may not have the answer they're asking, but you may have information that would lead them to believe at least this is what you know and you can share. And, you know, obviously security is a whole different animal on this, but the idea is that transparency will go a long way. And then, you know, obviously the data criteria, interesting, for those of you that suffered through the probationary period removal process that was going on, you know, when they asked about people with under, you know, that hadn't finished their probation, we dug into the data and we're like, all right, let's see what the data says. And we started out with 2,000 names on the list. But by the time we QA'd everything and made sure every single person was, because this probation flag was being set by the personnel system because they'd been promoted, but they weren't really on a probation in the context of how this would apply. We got that list whittled down to less than 900 after we QA'd it. And then of that 900, we actually reviewed all those to see if there were any performance problems, which is the legitimate reason to remove somebody on probation. We ended up only letting 18 people go because that was the ones that we could actually say they didn't meet the criteria. We didn't just blindly pick 2,000 people out the door. We ended up only removing 18. But that was the idea of saying using the data and the criteria to actually make an informed decision and not just like running a quick query and saying, boom, let's get rid of all these people. So, and that's where I think from a leadership standpoint, you need to make sure you know what's going on and you do use the data and make sure the data is right. Next. All right, so when organizations listen to their people, it implies that they matter. Oh, that's the novel concept, but it actually works. And of course, you know, I think we can all agree if we matter, it's more important to us. So, and I say, you know, when we feel seen, heard, and valued, I think we bring a different side of ourselves to the workplace than when we're not. Next. So the other side of this, and I know I went through this myself with my organization, is long-term goals. You know, living in an IT world when you're faced with upgrading 500 servers that are all behind on their operating system, you know, like 10 years behind, or updating a piece of software that's 10 or 12 years old. And the team looks at it and it goes, oh my God, we can't do this. I'm like, what do you mean you can't do this? It's 500. Every single one of those servers has a unique, you know, set of circumstances. Oh, okay, let's do 10. Let's see how that works out. Let's find out how bad the problem is before we throw in the towel. And the idea is that when you present the, gosh, we got to, you know, move this mountain to the other side of the road, and here's a teaspoon, most of the people are like, I can't do it. It's overwhelming, you know. And so breaking the problems down into smaller chunks that still provide progress towards the end goal is a great strategy to removing the uncertainty and the overwhelming nature of what's going on. And I could tell you, we had a situation where we needed to upgrade this software, and they had a tool, right? We ran the tool, and it said, in order for you to be compliant with today's version, you have 4,000 changes you need to make. And my team went, 4,000 changes? It's going to take us a year. We don't have a year. And I was like, well, why don't we just go one version at a time? And I think we're on like 7, and we need to go from 7 to 8. Those only 400 changes. Let's do those. Because as we started making those changes, that 4,000 number decreased because we'd already made the changes that were in the earlier software. So it wasn't really 4,000 in the end. But by doing it piece by piece by piece, they were manageable chunks, and we had success at every step of the way. We did it. We made it to the next version. And the ISOs and the security folks were very happy because each successive version was more secure than the last, because that's kind of why we had to do all this. Back when they were really enforcing end of life on software, we had to take care of it. Okay. And then, of course, it makes it achievable. And then the monthly check-ins make sure. And that's where leadership can say, okay, do you have any roadblocks? Is there anything I can do to clear the pathway for you? Is there a way that we can somehow fit, I can make this better for you? And a lot of times I get feedback like, yeah, IT's not responding to our requests for new servers. Can you speed that up? And then, as a leader, that would be my job, is to go and create the situation for success. I may not be doing the work, but I could facilitate helping getting them the resources to do the work. And I think those are always things, and that translates very well into lots of tasking that may happen within your organization. Is sometimes the leader may not be doing the work, but you might be able to facilitate doing it. Or sometimes it's just running top cover. It's like, look, my team's busy. You can't be calling them every 10 minutes, asking them questions, if and basically providing top cover for your groups so they can get their jobs done. So next. And then tips for celebrating success. Now, I mentioned that we did our kudos section of our newsletter, but we also did quarterly, I guess we call them potlucks. But they also turned into quarterly, recognized people. But a lot of times we wouldn't actually tell them in advance. We made it a surprise. So the idea was, that we would all show up, everybody bring their dish. We had some really great potlucks, I have to say. And, but then we would invite a senior leader to come over, like the director general or deputy assistant secretary, and we'd hand them like a stack of paper, and they would literally read out these local kind of awards that we were giving out to our teams and our employees for their accomplishments in that quarter. Because if you can understand a large organization and a lot of moving parts, there's always successes in there. And you don't have to send an article to the Post every time something good happens, but within the teams and within the organization, celebrating those wins goes a long way, because people, again, feel like they matter. They feel like they made a contribution that was recognized. And having a senior leader come in, my boss, to come in and actually call them out, that was a huge, just a big boost for them to recognize that, hey, their contributions were being recognized all the way up through the chain of command. And that public recognition, basically, it does well. I mean, some people are very uncomfortable with it. I get it. But in the end, I think everybody appreciates the fact of being appreciated. So next. Yeah. So small actions, big impact. You don't have to do everything in one day. Choose one thing and start. Consistency and authenticity matter more than perfection. And I can tell you that is probably the one thing that I hold very dear with, is authenticity. I'm always myself. I don't apologize. If I don't know something, I say I don't know. I think ultimately that's how you gain trust. And then it's interesting, when there's trust within the organization, people will come to you with issues and concerns that if they don't trust you, they wouldn't come to you with. With the understanding that, it's for the better of the mission or the better of the organization. It's the idea that as a collective team, we're supporting the organization to accomplish the mission. And I think that should be more powerful than any of the individual issues that happen. And you always kind of keep the eye on that. Or I guess the current buzzword is make that your North Star. So, all right, we have a pivot, or a poll. I'm sorry, poll. not a pivot.
Yeah, so along down with what you're saying about the small actions and big impact, and what's this one action you'll commit to? That is our poll. So, what's the one action you'll commit to trying in the next 30 days? Increase my visibility and accessibility within my team. Create regular communications cadence. Don talked about newsletter, town halls. Implement anonymous feedback mechanisms. Super important to get that discussion going. Practice vulnerability and admit uncertainty openly. I think a very undervalued attribute. And then break down big goals into smaller achievable wins. So we're going to give you another 10, 15 seconds on this. I don't think there's any wrong choices here. It's really where you align to and
Yeah,
where you see yourself as a leader. So I'm really curious to see as these responses come in.
we should have probably made that check all that apply. It might have been
Yes,
a better
yes.
choice.
Next time we're going to do that.
That's on. Was that my fault or was that?
Oh, I'll take it as my fault.
I wasn't. I meant like, did I need to say something different? Because yes,
I'm honestly not even sure. So let's see how we're doing here. I'm going to end the poll in about 10 seconds here. All right, looks like responses have slowed down. So we'll share the results. So let's,
yeah, big break down big goals. That's a good one.
yeah, yeah. In my house, we call it breaking boulders into pebbles.
Ah, yeah.
This way it's less overwhelming and it really allows you to be, feel like you're accomplishing something.
The overused one, of course, is eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah, that's just too graphic. So,
Oh,
uh,
literally eating the elephant. So yeah. All right.
anything here surprise you on these results?
No, I'm actually happy to see. I think when I talk to people about this, and I've done this in other forums, other areas, I think anonymous feedback mechanisms are usually very powerful. You just have to be prepared for what you hear because sometimes it's ugly, especially if you're trying to rebuild your trust in your team. And then breaking down big goals into smaller ones. Um, that strategy has saved me more times than not, just because people get in their own heads and they just look at a task and are like, oh, this is too much. I mean, it even happens in real life. It's not necessarily even related to work. It's like, okay, well, how do I get through this and break it into some pieces? So.
Well, I think just from like a productivity standpoint too, and it's such an enabling thing. If you can break it down to small, it's more addressable for everyone involved. And I feel like then it's something that can be accomplished. So
And then of course, the increasing my visibility and accessibility, that's something you have to work on. That's a deliberate thing. That can't be a passive kind of a deal. That has to be
yeah,
something that you have to take, and it's got to, I think the other side that I brought up, and it's the word shown on the screen, consistent. You can't be like one day pop in on everybody and say hello and then check a box going, okay, I was more visible. No, that means consistency. That means on a regular basis. I had like morning chats. I call it coffees with my teams. I put my WebEx out there for anybody, and I had it was just a morning chat session. No agenda, no rules. Talk about, sports, talk about, anything. But the idea was it's 30 minutes every day, and everybody had my link, and they could click and they could join, and we could chat. And the idea was that the idea is I was available. Now, I only had a few people take care of it, but I had one person, even though I've left government, we still meet every morning at 7:30 for 30 minutes of just
that's
shooting the
great.
ball. That's
That's
like
great.
7 years or 6 years worth of chats.
Yeah.
The thing about it is just you create connections and you can talk. So very interesting. All right. Do we have another slide?
Let's see here.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I guess so. We're all in this together. Of course, building the connections takes courage, vulnerability, and consistent action. Okay. So it's, not being too proud to admit you don't know something. It's leaning on the experts, making sure they feel valued, and yeah, just being strong and saying, hey, let's do this. And, I think the transparency is such an important aspect of that. And I think the courage, vulnerability, and consistent action kind of will be revealed if you're transparent. Because I obviously, if you're share with what you're doing, you're clear about your intentions, you demonstrate integrity, you keep your word, you take care of your people, that all will result in a much more cohesive team. And then the happy things happen, like people will take on things that you didn't ask them to because now they believe in the mission. They know how you lead. They know the organization well enough to go, this needs to get done. I'm going to go do it. I don't need to be told to go do it. Which to me, and this is where I've always lived, is in the mission space. It's like, look, if the mission, this is the mission. So before I even have to say, oh, this needs to get done, somebody was already doing it. And I think that ultimately results in having a great team that just knows their role and knows their goal and what the organization's purpose is, and then going off to make that better. So, but we have to show up, we have to listen, and we have to care. So,
yeah. Well, Donald, thank you so much. I think that we covered a lot of different areas about as leaders how we can show up and really connect the workforce. I did have a question for you, and it's around the vulnerability part. I think as a leader, it's probably one of the hardest attributes. And when I'm looking at the poll results, it was one of the lower ranked areas. It seems like you in your leadership style really was able to exhibit vulnerability. You gave a lot of different examples. Can you spend like maybe 2 minutes on how we can develop maybe some of those skills as leaders to show the vulnerability side of our true selves? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I think it's really important.
We should have talked about this in advance. No, I'm just kidding. No. Yeah, to me, that's a hard term to define because I think everybody perceives vulnerability in a different way.
Yeah.
I mean, do you shed a tear when you hear bad news? I think ultimately, going back to this being authentic and caring, I truly cared about my people. I made sure that if, I can tell you in my entire, 15 or 18 years in the federal government, I never denied anybody time off. I don't know how many times I heard somebody go, my boss won't let me take any leave. I'm like, why not? I mean, that shouldn't even be my place to tell you no. It should. And, and the interesting thing about this is, from a leadership standpoint, is if your organization is so strained that one person being away for any length of time could put you into jeopardy, you got a problem. You should have multiple people that cover multiple roles. And that was always my philosophy was there should never be any single points of failure in an organization. You should always have. And I had a couple of situations where I had a guy who was on vacation and skiing in Colorado, and he was logging in every morning doing production support. And I'm like, why are you doing this? And everybody was like, he's the only one that does that. And I'm like, oh, we're not going to have this continue. And it was two things. One, I didn't want this guy to have to not have his vacation. He couldn't unplug because he had to work every day, even though he was quote unquote on vacation. Yeah. I wanted him to have a little bit of relief as well. And I can tell you, once we put his relief in place, the guy took time off. He was in a much better state because he was always stressed. I would just say he always exhibited stress when I talked to him because he never got a break. And those are the kinds of situations where I think caring about your, yeah, I run up. Sorry, Mary. That's a hard one to get around. Maybe we could train an AI agent or something to be a response while you could take some time off or something. I think the other side of that is, I think the I don't know and the having all the answers part of vulnerability is the most important. It's recognizing that you don't have to have all the answers, but it's also having the understanding and knowing your team well enough to know who does and who can support that. And bringing those into the fold and saying, I don't know the answer, but Mary does. Mary, what do you think? We need to solve this problem. And it's always a we. It's not an I, it's not a you, it's a we. Sure. It's a team. We're always a team. And the other side of that, if you take that mindset of we succeed and fail as a team, well, it puts it in a whole different light than, oh, you screwed up, Don. You're in the penalty box for a week. And when I first arrived in my job, that was the way the culture operated. Fed would tell a contractor what to do. The contractor would do exactly what they were told. It would be the wrong thing. The Fed would then blame the contractor for screwing up. And we used to have a joke in the meetings. It was bus tracks. who came out of the meeting with bus tracks on their back from being thrown under the bus by leadership. And I
Yeah.
stopped that stuff right away. I was like, look, no, there's no finger pointing. We don't do this. And if anybody exhibited that behavior, I was very clear with them that that's not how we operate. Now, again, like I say, if they made multiple mistakes, if they repeated the same mistakes, that's a different problem. You're not paying attention, you're not learning, or you don't care. Any one of those three, I don't want you in my organization anymore. So, I mean, there are specific, there's kind of lines there you can still draw. You can still be vulnerable, you can still be authentic, and you can still care about the mission. But people have to reciprocate and contribute and care just as much.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. But I did want to thank Donald and sharing his knowledge and wisdom with us today. So, Donald, thank you. Here's his contact information if you'd like
Right?
to touch
Feel
with
free to connect with me on LinkedIn. If you have a question about leadership or anything like that, I am always willing to help. I know through a few of these sessions, Doug, I have mentored many people. 3 or 4 sessions long after I had spoke, they reached out. We had conversations. So I don't have I'm doing this because I want to help. So if you need help, let me know.
and believe him when he says that. I've seen it in action, and we do appreciate it. I'd like to thank everyone who attended today in this session. I hope you got a lot of information out of it. I thought it was a very fruitful discussion. There are the resources are in the resources tab under documents. I also want to thank our sponsors that assist GovLoop and NextGen in giving us the ability to provide free training. I'd like to thank WAPA, Pluralsight, Code for America, and NAGC, which is the National Association of Government Communicators. Our closing keynotes start at 3 p.m. We have regrouping with strengths, coping with burnout, which I think in reading some of these comments, I think we could use some of that and hopefully some tips there. We also have a thought leaders panel talking about I'm in public service because, which is a very rewarding and motivational session to listen to. So please check that out. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Your work matters. You matter. You have showed up today in so many different ways, and just like I want to say, just reading the chat and all these sessions, I love seeing the community come together. So thank you very much. We'll see you in the closing keynotes, and once again, have a great day, and let's keep doing great things. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.